What would you do if the most unlikely person in the room, someone you least expected, was the one to challenge you? What if, in front of everyone, you were forced to face a truth you'd never imagined? When a black belt challenged a simple woman to a friendly spar, he never expected the lesson he was about to learn. What happened next shocked everyone in the gym, including him. The gym was alive with energy on that Tuesday afternoon. The rhythmic sounds of feet hitting the mats, the clinking of weights, and the focused murmur of conversations filled the air. It was the middle of the day, and while the gym wasn't overflowing with people, it had enough to create a steady hum of activity. College kids were on the mats rolling through their drills. An older man was hitting the heavy bag with sharp punches, and a group of beginners sat cross-legged, watching the seasoned fighters like they were taking notes for their next big breakthrough. And then there was Maya Williams. If you had walked into the gym that day and glanced around, you would have passed her without a second thought. She wasn't wearing any flashy gym gear, no branded athletic wear or expensive training shoes. Maya was just simple. Her clothes were practical leggings, a plain t-shirt, and a pair of sneakers that had seen better days. She wasn't here for the spotlight. She wasn't here to impress anyone. She was here to train, to learn, and to grow. Most of the gym members didn't think much of her. She didn't stand out like the others. She wasn't loud. She didn't talk to anyone unless necessary. She wasn't a fighter anyone expected to notice. She wasn't the type of person you would expect to see at the top of the leaderboard. She was just another member of the gym, nothing more, nothing less. But there was something about Maya. She had a quiet confidence that was almost unsettling. Every movement she made was purposeful, calculated. When she sparred, her focus was intense, and her calmness in the face of an opponent's aggression was striking. She had been training for months now, learning the ins and outs of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, soaking up the lessons from the black belts like a sponge. The more time passed, the more Maya's movements became fluid, controlled. But most people, still, saw her as just another beginner. Across the gym, Jake Dawson, the head instructor, had no idea what was about to happen. Jake was a seasoned black belt, with years of experience under his belt. He had earned his place at the top of the gym, teaching the next generation of fighters, commanding respect wherever he went. To say he was confident would be an understatement. Jake had the kind of presence that drew people in. His confidence was magnetic, and people respected him not only for his skill but also for his energy. He was the kind of fighter everyone admired, and his students aspired to be like him. That day, however, something was different. Jake had just finished teaching a class when Maya, sitting on the sidelines, caught his attention. He had noticed her working diligently over the past few months, always showing up early and staying late, always focused and never distracted. He could see the growth in her. She was improving every day, and while she didn't speak much, there was a fire behind her eyes. You know, Jake said to a few of the students, Maya's been killing it in class lately. She's got a pretty good guard game going for someone so new. One of the students snorted, half joking. Come on, coach. She's just a beginner, right? Jake chuckled. Yeah, but she's got the basics down better than most people who've been training for years. His tone softened as he looked at Maya, who was tying her GI in the corner. She might surprise us soon enough. As the day progressed, Jake, ever the competitor, began to think about a small challenge. He had rolled with some of the toughest fighters in the gym, but he hadn't yet had a light roll with Maya. A simple, easy sparring session. It would be fun. After all, she was a beginner, right? With a sly grin, Jake turned toward Maya, his confidence unwavering. Hey Maya, Jake called from across the room, his voice loud enough to carry. You want to roll with me for a few minutes? Just for fun. Maya looked up, surprised. She had never been asked to roll by him. The other instructors didn't usually pair with beginners. But Jake had a reputation for occasionally rolling with new students to give them a taste of what they could aspire to. Sure, she said quietly, but there was a calm assurance in her voice that made Jake pause. Maya wasn't nervous. She didn't hesitate. She simply got up from her spot on the mat, removed her shoes, and stepped toward the center. Her movements were calm, deliberate, like she had done this 1,000 times before. The gym fell silent for a moment. Jake watched her walk toward him. She wasn't showing off, wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just going through the motions, focused, centered, and ready to learn. You're on, Jake said with a grin. But there was a slight edge to his voice now. This wouldn't be just any sparring session. He was intrigued. She had grown, and now it was time to see how far she had really come. They slapped hands and bumped fists, signaling the start of the roll. The gym, once full of casual conversation, now became still. Phones came out, but no one dared to speak. They were watching to see what would happen. Jake moved first. Naturally, he reached for Maya's collar, a classic move. He was expecting to take her down icily, to show her what it felt like to face a black belt. But Maya didn't react the way he anticipated. She didn't stiffen up like most beginners did. Instead, she flowed. As Jake tried to pull her into a takedown, Maya slipped out of his grip, almost effortlessly. She didn't force it. She just moved with him. Her body followed the rhythm of his, like water flowing around a rock in a stream. Jake found himself off balance for a split second, but Maya wasn't done. In that brief moment, she reversed the position, sweeping him onto the mat with a kind of control Jake didn't expect. The gym's collective breath caught in their throats. Jake was on his back, staring up at Maya, who had his arm locked in. No one saw that coming. Jake blinked in surprise. "Nice," he said, his voice still steady, though he could feel a shift inside. "Let's go again." He didn't know it yet, but the story of that day was only just beginning. Jake shook his head with a slight chuckle, getting back to his feet. "All right," he said, brushing the dust off his GI. "That was good, but I'm not going easy on you now." He wasn't trying to be cocky, but there was an undeniable spark of competitiveness inside him. He had been rolling for years, and there was no way he would let a beginner, someone who had only been training for a few months, get the better of him so easily. He was a black belt, after all. This wasn't supposed to be hard. But something inside him told him that Maya was different. Maya remained calm, watching him closely. There was no sign of arrogance or overconfidence in her demeanor. Her eyes were focused, almost contemplative, but there was something else, a quiet determination. She wasn't trying to prove a point. She was just moving with an ease that was unsettling for someone who was still technically a beginner. Jake didn't let the moment linger. He lunged at her, this time quicker, with more force. His grip aimed for her collar once again, his intention clear: take control immediately. But Maya, who had been waiting for him to come at her with that kind of aggression, flowed right under his grip. Her body was a study in fluidity, like a perfectly honed machine that moved with precision. Jake tried to follow her as she slipped from his reach, but Maya was already positioning herself, shifting her weight to neutralize his attempt before he even knew it. In a blink, she had him in a clinch, and suddenly, his back was against the mat again. The crowd in the gym held its breath. They had expected Jake to dominate. After all, he was the black belt. Maya, in contrast, was someone who had barely scratched the surface in their eyes. But the way she moved, there was something about her that felt almost ... INSTINCTUAL. Jake had been sparring with white belts for years, and no one had ever made him feel this way, not even some of the purple belts he rolled with. But here he was, on his back, unable to move with the fluidity he was accustomed to. He forced a smile, his confidence never wavering. Okay, I see you. But don't think it's gonna be that easy." But inside, Jake felt a knot tightening. He hadn't felt challenged like this in years. Every time he attempted to break her guard or move into a dominant position, Maya was right there, anticipating his every move. There was no panic in her eyes, no hint of fear or hesitation. It was like she was playing a different game, one he had forgotten how to play. They squared off again, Jake trying to get a better read on Maya's movements. This time, he moved with more purpose. He had to press the pace. He couldn't let her dictate the flow of the match anymore. He came forward again, trying for a double leg takedown, his legs low and quick, aiming to lift Maya and force her into a dominant position. But before his mind could even register what had happened, Maya had already read his intentions. She sprawled like a professional, her body weight heavy on his hips, and in an instant, she moved behind him, her arms wrapping around his neck in a clean choke attempt. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He had been in this position hundreds of times, but never in a way that left him feeling helpless. He managed to twist his body slightly, creating enough space to free himself. But Maya wasn't giving him any room to breathe. Her control was tight, seamless, and she flowed from one position to the next without effort. The gym began to whisper. "Did you see that?" one student murmured. "She's not a beginner. She's something else." Jake fought hard to maintain his composure. "Nice try," he said, but his voice was strained. "You've got some moves, I'll give you that." But inside, he knew that wasn't enough. The intensity of their sparring had reached a level that he wasn't used to. Maya wasn't just some new student who had a couple of decent moves. No, she was a problem. Jake knew he needed to regain control, but Maya had been outpacing him every step of the way. With each move, each subtle adjustment, she pushed him further into a corner. Then, without warning, Maya attempted another move, a swift sweep that knocked Jake off balance. Before he knew it, he was on his back again. The gym was quiet now, the whispers turning into hushed murmurs. No way. Someone breathed. Jake rolled quickly to his knees, trying to regain his composure. His breath was ragged, and his mind raced to process what was happening. He had always been the one who controlled the pace, who dictated the terms of the match. But Maya, she was always one step ahead. All right, Jake said, trying to sound casual, though his chest was tight from the exertion. Let's do one more round. I'm not done yet. He had never been this challenged before, and the realization was starting to hit him. He had underestimated Maya in a way that was almost embarrassing. Maya nodded silently, her face still calm, still unbothered by the intensity of the sparring. There was a serenity about her that made it impossible to read her, and that was what unsettled Jake most of all. He was used to seeing the stress, the fight in an opponent's eyes. But Maya, she was different. Jake was used to dominating his roles, but this was different. Maya, this quiet woman who barely made a fuss, was turning every move he made into a demonstration of just how much more he still had to learn. He wiped the sweat from his brow, trying to maintain his calm. But deep down, something inside him was shifting. The confidence that had always been so unwavering was beginning to falter. He had been sparring for years, always with people who challenged him, but never like this. Never with someone who didn't seem fazed by his attacks. Someone who didn't flinch, who wasn't trying to impress anyone. Maya wasn't trying to show off. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was simply moving, fluid and calm, like the mat was where she belonged, and it was making Jake feel uneasy. The next round started with Jake trying to get back on top of things. His pride was on the line now. His students were watching. His reputation was at stake. He had always been the best at the gym, and now, here he was, struggling to keep up with a beginner. All right, enough of this. I'm not holding back, Jake muttered to himself, shaking off the frustration. Maya stood across from him, her eyes locked on him with a steady gaze, her stance relaxed. There was no arrogance in her, no bravado. She just stood there, waiting for him to make the first move, and the calmness in her eyes made Jake even more nervous. She wasn't intimidated. She wasn't even rattled. He took a deep breath and came forward, looking to strike first. His movements were faster now, more aggressive, as if trying to force the match in his favor. He grabbed for her collar, pulling her into a position he had practiced hundreds of times. But Maya, as she had done before, shifted with ease, her body a step ahead of his. She slipped under his grasp and moved behind him. Before Jake could react, Maya's arm was around his neck. The submission was already there, and the cold realization hit him hard. She was setting him up. Jake instinctively tried to fight his way out, pushing against her arms, but Maya's grip was tight, her hold flawless. He could feel his air supply growing thin. His chest was heaving. This wasn't just a light roll anymore. This wasn't fun. This was survival. He managed to break free, but Maya was already transitioning again. Her movements like clockwork, no wasted energy, no panic. She was in complete control. Jake rolled onto his back, his mind racing. His body was tired, but he couldn't show weakness. Not now. Not in front of the gym. Come on, Brian, one of the students whispered from the sidelines. She's got him, man, Brian, Jake thought. The words stung, even if they were meant to be a compliment. His students were comparing him to someone else now. It wasn't just the embarrassment of not being able to control Maya, it was the loss of respect. People were seeing him struggle in a way he hadn't in years. With every attack he tried, she countered it. Jake shot for a quick single leg, trying to take her down, but Maya didn't just sprawl. She used his momentum against him, spun around, and was on his back again, in an instant. She was almost floating, her movements smooth and light, as though she had trained for decades. Rather than a few months. He tried again, desperation creeping into his motions. He shot for another takedown, his muscles straining to push her down, but once more, she flowed. His grip on her collar slipped, and the next thing he knew, he was on his back again, staring up at the ceiling, trying to catch his breath. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Jake paused for a moment, sitting up slowly. His eyes were focused, but there was no smile, no easy confidence. This wasn't a fun match anymore. This was real. And for the first time, he was facing an opponent who could not only keep up, but exceed his expectations. He exhaled, shaking his head as he pushed his hair back. He wasn't about to lose to a beginner. Not like this. Not in front of everyone. "All right," he said, voice steady, but laced with the pressure that was starting to build in his chest. "Let's turn it up." But Maya wasn't having it. She didn't go in with the same intensity. She wasn't pushing hard. She wasn't rushing to dominate. Instead, she remained calm, still. She raised an eyebrow as if to say, "Let's see how you react." Jake rushed forward with more speed, trying to control the pace. He needed to take control. He couldn't keep letting Maya dictate the match. He faked a few attacks, testing her defenses. And every time, she was there ready for him, calm, poised. "Damn," he muttered under his breath, his frustration mounting. But he didn't give up. He shot for another takedown, this time pulling hard on her leg to get her off balance. He had the position for a second, but Maya was already adjusting, swiveling her hips to free herself and reverse him. It was like she had memorized every movement, every angle. Jake's head spun as Maya locked him in another dominant position. But this time, she had his back hooks in her arms around his neck, and Jake felt himself start to lose control. He could hear the whispers from the sideline again. "No way. She's got him in a rear naked choke," one of the white belts said in disbelief. Jake's world started to slow down. His thoughts went blank as he struggled. He could feel his body growing weaker. There was nothing he could do. And that's when it happened. The pressure of Maya's grip around his neck began to tighten. Every ounce of energy in his body screamed for air tap, he thought, but his pride screamed louder. With no other choice, Jake tapped. It wasn't a gentle tap. It was a hard, urgent tap. The gym went dead silent. The moment Jake tapped, the entire gym went silent. It wasn't just the shock of the defeat. It was the silence that followed, that heavy, almost suffocating quiet that weighed on everyone's shoulders. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the gym had collectively held its breath. The gym that had cheered on Jake for years, the gym where he had been the invincible instructor, now witnessed him on the receiving end of defeat. It wasn't just that he had lost. Cliff was who he had lost to: a simple woman, a newcomer, a beginner in their eyes. Maya let go of the hold immediately, releasing the pressure around Jake's neck. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. She didn't even look at him in that smug, victorious way that many would have expected from a winner. Instead, she stood up calmly and stepped off the mats, as if she had just completed a light training session. Her movements graceful and deliberate. She didn't need the acknowledgement, the applause, or the attention. Jake stayed kneeling on the mat for a few moments longer than he should have, his chest heaving. He could hear the soft murmur of voices behind him. Whispers filled the room. She tapped him out. He lost to her. ... a beginner. It was like a wave of realization had struck the gym. No one had seen it coming out like this. No one had expected a quiet woman, someone who had barely been in the gym for a few months, to bring down the mighty black belt. Jake finally stood up slowly, wiping the sweat from his brow. He could feel the stares on him, the weight of his own ego slowly cracking. He forced a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're good," he said to Maya, his voice strained but sincere. That was impressive. Maya only nodded in return, her expression still calm, her eyes not revealing any hint of satisfaction or arrogance. She wasn't looking for validation. She had known the outcome from the start. This was never about proving herself to anyone. It was about the work, the discipline, and the quiet confidence she had developed over the years. Jake felt his chest tighten. He had lost. And he wasn't just losing a match, he was losing something far more significant. He was losing his sense of control, his identity as the top fighter. He had spent years building a reputation, years establishing himself as the one everyone looked up to. But in that moment, all of it came crashing down. Not because he had lost, but because of how he had lost. "Who is she?" someone whispered from the sidelines. Jake's eyes flicked to the students who had gathered around, their phones out, capturing the moment. They were all watching him. His pride had taken a beating, but now there was a new, uncomfortable truth hanging in the air. Maya was no longer just a beginner. She was something more. She had something that Jake had been too blind to see. True mastery that didn't rely on ego, and a presence that didn't need validation. As Maya walked away from the mats, Jake felt a mix of confusion and respect bubbling inside him. How had this happened? He had trained with world-class fighters, wrestled with the best. Yet, here was this quiet woman, who didn't fit the mold of the gym's elite, who had just humbled him in front of everyone. Jake had spent his whole life believing that strength and dominance were the keys to success in this world. But Maya had shown him a different way, a way that was subtle, humble, and yet immensely powerful. As the whispers grew louder in the gym, one of the white belts spoke up, his voice full of awe and disbelief. Did she just tap out the black belt? A beginner. She's got to be something more. Jake stood still for a moment longer, his gaze following Maya as she grabbed her bag and walked toward the exit. There was no big exit, no fanfare, no applause. She simply left, as quietly as she had come. And in that moment, Jake realized something profound. Maya wasn't just a woman who rolled with a black belt for fun. She had just taught him the most important lesson of his life. Strength isn't just about power, it's about control, balance, and knowing when to fight and when to walk away. His heart was still racing from the match, but his mind was starting to catch up. He had spent years focused on proving his worth, on accumulating medals and accolades, but in the end, it was Maya who had the true understanding of the art. She didn't need to prove anything. Her actions had spoken louder than any words or trophies ever could. A few minutes passed, but the room was still filled with the remnants of shock. Students and members of the gym were murmuring about the match, replaying every move, every reversal, and every tap out. It was hard for them to believe what had just happened. She tapped out the black belt, someone said. She's got to be an underground fighter or something. No way, she's just a beginner. Jake didn't respond to them. He didn't even look back at his students. He walked toward the mats and sat down, taking a moment to breathe. His ego was bruised, but it wasn't just his pride that hurt, it was his perception of what real strength meant. Maya had shown him that humility was as much a part of the journey as the victories. As the gym began to settle down and people returned to their routines, one of the students walked up to Jake. "Coach, are you okay?" The concern in his voice was genuine. But Jake wasn't sure what to say. He didn't feel okay. He felt something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time, vulnerable. Jake looked at the student, forcing a tired smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. I just need to think about a few things." That night, as Jake sat in his car after the gym emptied out, he couldn't shake the thought of Maya's calmness, her control. "Don't let this game eat you alive," she had said. But it wasn't just a lesson in jiu-jitsu. It was a message about life, about ego, about knowing when to walk away from the fight. He hadn't realized it until now, but Maya had done more than tap him out. She had opened his eyes to something he had missed in his single-minded pursuit of success. The next morning, when the gym opened, Jake was the first to arrive, not to train, not to roll, but to sit in silence and reflect. And he knew, deep down, that his life, his fighting career would never be the same again.